Hello, women of the word. I am Maisynn, and I am here to do a devotional today on following God's calling on your life. For this devotional, I'm going to be looking at Isaiah chapter 6, specifically verse 8, but I want to give you a little backstory on the rest of this chapter. So throughout this chapter, the prophet Isaiah receives this vision where he sees angels and he sees God seated on this throne, and he is cleansed from all of his sin by this piece of coal before he receives this commission from God to go out and deliver a message to the people of Judah. This message likely would have fallen on closed ears because the people of Judah were not likely to have received this message with joyful hearts by any means. But in verse 8 it says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?'" And when I first read this verse, and those that follow it, I was thinking about how often God places opportunities and callings on our life, but we fail to respond because we're looking for a sign that we have yet to see. And I think in today's world, we've become so expectant on signs that we've forgotten that God doesn't always send signs, but instead he calls the assigned. And part of our assignment as Christians is to find the need and to listen to what God has asked us to do. And when he asks who to send, to follow through with what he has asked. And in this verse, Isaiah's response to God, saying, "Whom shall I send?" He says, "Send me." He didn't respond with, "Well, I'll go if nobody else does," or "I'll go if you do this for me." But instead, he just says, "Send me," because God's callings on our life are not circumstantial and they're not revocable. Romans 11, verse 29 tells us that God never withdraws gifts or callings once they are given to us. And in the same way, he doesn't take back callings that he has placed on your life. He's also not going to call you to something based on the circumstances that you have provided him with, because he already knows your need before you even ask him. So verses 9 through 10 in the same chapter read, he said, "Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding, be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused, make their ears dull, and close their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." So Isaiah went and he preached to people who likely wouldn't respond the way that you would like somebody to respond. And he likely felt like he wasn't satisfied with his ministry because those around him weren't satisfied with it. But God told him to go, and he followed through with what God had asked, despite the lack of satisfaction that he might have felt at the time. So this made me really consider how often I have received callings from the Lord, but I have failed to respond because I'm waiting on the satisfaction or fulfillment of man, which may never come. And I was asking myself, what if instead of waiting on the satisfaction or fulfillment of man, I would simply just go as God has called me to go and follow through completely in his timing, completely in his calling, and completely in his purpose for my life, with no other consideration or concern for how man perceives me or perceives the ministry that the Lord has placed on my life. This also made me think about the sermon in Matthew, where Jesus calls us to be the salt and the light of the world. And we live in a world full of destruction and chaos, and being the salt and light means that we're willing to step into some of the darkest places and shine the light of Christ on places that we might not feel necessarily comfortable stepping into, but it's part of our calling and assignment as a Christian. And then being the salt in a world of destruction, because this world is constantly decaying and salt stops decay. So by being the salt and the light of the world, we can stop the decay and slow down the decay, and we can step into these places that might not necessarily feel comfortable. I once heard a pastor say that your assignments change over time, but your callings never do. And I think that what your assignments are what you're doing in the present that allow you to fulfill the callings that God has placed on your life for the future. So my question, and what I'd encourage you all to consider, is where has God called you to be right now? What is the assignment that he has placed on your life in this season? And have you been obedient to it? Have you been following through and answering the calling that God has placed without concern for what others think, or without concern of it failing or not going the way that you have planned? So thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it spoke to you, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.